Not even the shag carpet, that nice fuzzy like 3-inch pile, orange and blue. And
so, Rob, you and I are nearly the same age. Kylie, too, I believe. I remember that being all the rage as a kid. And I remember, like, seeing people raking their freaking carpet. Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Digital Brand Manager Rob Watsack.
Good morning, Patrick.
Senior Editor Kylie Jacques.
Hello.
And Producer Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Well, it is a pleasure to see you all this morning. Thank you for being here.
Hello, Patrick. Nice to see you too.
It's been a while since you guys have been on the show. It's nice to have you here.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's been a while. Yes.
I've been keeping Matt and Brian on the show, and it was purely out of availability, no other reason.
Well, I'm sure listeners were happy about that because they're so informative.
Brian is great, right? He is. Yeah. I rely on him now to have all the building science knowledge I don't have. What have you guys been doing? What have you been doing, Rob?
What have I been doing? Oh man. So I've been trying to turn my basement into a workshop, and I'm wondering why the heck I didn't do this like 18 years ago, because it's a very rewarding experience, and it's going to help me tackle a lot of other projects in the house a lot more easily, keeping my tools organized, having a space to spread out.
You never struck me as a basement dweller, Rob. What's the appeal?
Well, that's actually that's probably why. I mean, it's a stone basement, as I've probably mentioned many times in the podcast. It's basically a cave.
Yeah.
And it was dry way back when we had a boiler, but now in the summers it's damp unless I run a dehumidifier down there. But I never get any liquid water down there, so I'm just tightening the place up, putting that insulated and plywood floor that I've discussed a couple of times down. And that's working out really well. It's just plywood over pressure treated sleepers with rigid foam under and in between the sleepers. And but the latest thing was I built a really nice little built-in workbench and restored a little old vise that I had knocking around that was a rusty piece of junk, but now looks pretty and works
That's
well.
Cool. Nice.
I've seen some folks on YouTube who spend an inordinate amount of time repairing old tools. You didn't strike me as that type either.
Really?
I think he's
just
I love watching those videos, and I guess I was inspired.
Plus, vices are so cool. Even I like vices. I don't know why. They're just so. I mean,
how many vices do you have, Kylie?
I have many vices.
Well, I saw the photograph of your shop, Rob. It looks quite livable in there. And how long has this been going on?
I guess I started on the vise. Well, the plywood floor has been like piecemeal over the past year or a couple of years, but I'm going to hopefully finish that in the next couple of weeks. But the vise, I just got inspired early last week and just went out one night and just with my angle grinder and disc sanders and put a nice clear coat on it and put some lubricant on all the moving parts. And then just over the weekend, I built the workbench out of some. And the awesome thing about it is that this whole project, I'm using up all the materials I've been stockpiling for years, like the pieces of scraps of plywood and framing lumber and paint. I painted the whole ceiling in this one section of the basement. But the messiest part was I started cutting out all the pipes from the old boiler that's no longer there. They're just like a spider web of them across the whole ceiling, and they're just full of this nasty black thick sludge from like the boiler.
How do you get rid of that? How do you just slop it up off the floor?
Yeah. I mean, I've been letting it drain into buckets as much as possible as I cut the pipes. But
so that's probably going to give you a lot more headroom, right?
Yeah,
or at least a couple of feet.
Because the ceiling, once I put the plywood in and the insulation, the ceiling's only about 6'3" maybe. Mm-hmm. But I'm 5'10", so that's plenty of room for me. I can't move around big sheets of plywood overhead or anything like that. But for little projects, it'll be perfect.
Cool.
So little projects like what? What do you expect to do with this space, Rob?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is build all the doors for my kitchen that I'm supposed to be working on. And I told Michelle, I was like, I can't work on the kitchen till I have all my tools organized and a clean workspace, because especially in the winter time, I can't be going out in the yard and cutting stuff on the table saw on the lawn. So,
Wimp.
in the snow. Yeah.
That's what I do.
Yeah. Well, I can't be painting doors out there, though. That's for sure. But a friend of mine kind of inspired me to do this. He's on his third or fourth house over the years. He's a little older than us. And his previous home, he told his wife, he's like, I'm not touching anything in this house till I have this basement gutted and turned into a workshop. And she was bugging him. And then once he was done, and anytime she would ask him to do like some little task, he would like go downstairs, take like 10 minutes, and it was done. And
well, not only that, it keeps all of his crap out of the house, right?
Well, right. That's it. I hated over the years turning random rooms into workshops temporarily, because it's just a lot of mess to clean up. And if everything has its place, it's just so much easier to work.
Totally. That makes sense.
What about you, Kylie? What have you been working on?
Well, I've actually been trying to change my mindset. I'm gearing up to put my house on the market. So I have to go back to being a renter, which is a whole psychological, exercise. It's not easy to imagine doing that again after owning a house.
Aren't you going to miss your garden, Kylie?
Oh God, yes. It's like, I hope to spend one more season in it, but that's the biggest part, sharing walls and floors and not having land to work with. But I'll have it again. I've promised myself that. We'll see. It's a seller's market, but I'll tell you what it's not is a renter's market. Trying to find a place that I can imagine myself in there's a lot of dumps out there, and clearly for rent by crazy people. So I'm not going to move just anywhere. I want to be excited about where I'm heading. But it does have you, when you decide you're going to put your house on the market, it's like, oh boy, I better get that fixed. Like I could live with it, but I don't know that I'll be able to sell my house with it like that. I'm most concerned about my bathroom, which I never had the money to redo. And it's definitely the furthest thing from a selling point. I'll tell you that.
You mean folks are going to raise eyebrows at your bathroom?
It needs to be gutted and redone. No question.
I think most folks would tell you that you'll never recoup that money if you spend it on your bathroom.
If I do that, I'm staying, because I've lived with it for so long.
Yeah. I mean, your probably best bet is just, clean it up, put a coat of paint on, maybe do a few little projects. But
that's miracle paint. So anyway, it's no big, it's no small feat to sell a house. And I'm learning about that, because I've not done it before. I bought a house, but I never sold a house. So there's a lot to it.
Did you contact your same realtor that you bought it from?
I did. She's no longer in the business. She made a recommendation. And then, of course, I think I mentioned on the podcast that I was fantasizing about buying a piece of land. Well, I started getting into what that entails. Forget it. And the funny thing that I reached out to a couple of people, Mike Maines being one of them, and Bob Swinburne in Vermont, because that's where I want to head to.
Bob is an architect, and Mike Maines is a designer. We should tell folks.
Designer, right, and builder. But Bob was saying, you better think, given the fact that your job is completely remote, you better give some thought to where in Vermont you move, because Wi-Fi is not a given. So I would never have thought of that.
Wideband internet, right?
Yeah. Right. So you gotta be somewhere where there's service.
Well, the thing is, though, you would prefer to be somewhere with a service, but think about it. Martin Holliday, for all those years he was the editor of GBA, he was on a satellite internet on a remote off-the-grid cabin on a hill in Vermont.
Well, I don't know that's...
It's not practical. It's not ideal.
There are definitely some trade-offs with the satellite internet. I have heard. I have not experienced it myself, but it's very expensive, and my understanding is the speeds are not all that remarkable.
That's what I would think. Yeah. So anyway, lots to think about.
Well, I can't wait to attend the yard sale you're going to have before you move. I'm going to get some all kinds.
I already know what I'm going to how I'm going to distribute things.
Oh, great!
You're clearly going to get the Roby electric mower, Patrick. You've been asking about that thing for 2 years. It's yours.
Oh my God, that'd be kind of cool. And then I could get my gas tractor out of here. Jeff, what have you been doing in your oodles of spare time?
Do jigsaw puzzles count? I'm in hibernation mode.
Nothing wrong with that.
I've been working on the kitchen a little bit still. I finished the 3-drawer base cabinet I've talked about for a couple weeks. You guys haven't heard about that too much, but I bet you've seen some photographs. But I just need to put drawer fronts on it. It's been finished. The boxes are finished, and it's in position. Real happy with how it turned out. I am not a good cabinet maker, but I get better with every one of them. So that's what you want, right?
Well, it looked good in the pictures. How'd you cut all the drawer parts? What'd you use?
On a table saw with a dado set.
Yeah.
I talked a little bit about it in the last show, but when you buy an 8-inch expensive dado set, it really ups your game with regard to table saw joinery, Rob. I think you'd agree.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, to tell you the truth, I haven't really used a dado all that much because I've been at both ends of the spectrum. I've either been just like using my contractor saw and the random hand tools in my lawn, or working in cabinet shops where we have shapers where every single thing is made on a very dedicated tool, you know?
How did you guys do drawer boxes? Did you do dovetails, or were most things more utilitarian than that?
So when I worked for various like more hands-on custom carpenters over the years, we would do dovetails and use like a dovetail jig to cut the dovetails. But honestly,
and a router.
Honestly, most cabinet shops nowadays don't make their own drawers because it's this thing that if you've got a shop that's just dedicated to making drawers, you can just bang them out. Like we used to get them from a guy who had just one of those commercial condos. It was like the size of like a 4-car garage in our town, and he just had all his tools set up, and every time you went in there to pick up your order, there'd be like hundreds of drawer boxes just piled up everywhere in the room. And it was like you'd take your measurements for your drawers and you'd send them over, and within a few days or a week you'd have all the drawers for your cabinets already pre-lacquered and everything. So you basically just have to install the hardware and put your faces on everything.
Oh, that would be a dream come true. That's all I got to say.
Yeah.
So Brian asked me in the last show how I do my drawer slides, and I explained that I use a fixture oftentimes to hold the drawer box in the extended slides, which have already been mounted to the cabinet sides, right? Well, this time I got an idea to turn the cabinet box on its side. I pulled the drawer slides out and fastened the top slide first, and then turned it over and did the other side, and it worked really well. So I would suggest if y'all are having trouble doing your slides, try that method. It worked well.
For a small cabinet, that would be fine. If you're doing a big bank of cabinets, it'd probably be a little bit more awkward. But
it's still awkward, and 3/4-inch plywood cabinet boxes are pretty freaking heavy.
To tell you the truth, it's like it's been so long since I've done that. Like I can't remember the method that I would typically use, but I think I pretty much most of the time rely on measurements.
Measuring.
Yeah, I would just rely on measurements, and I'd use a lot of times what I would do is I'd cut little blocks of scrap plywood and have one for each drawer height, and I would use those as the guides for attaching the drawer slides to the sides of the cabinet cases.
That's a great idea too, Rob. I've done that as well.
Techniques.
I think I want to do, or have someone do, it's not going to be written by me, building kitchen cabinets article for the magazine, because I think someone who does it a lot has a lot to share and would soften the learning curve for the rest of us. So we heard from our friend Barbara. Barbara sent me an advertisement that she came across. And she says, I challenge you to rewrite this sentence so it actually says what they meant in their native language, but no longer makes my brain hurt. Thank goodness the URL actually has the word caulk in it, because on Twitter, I was totally stumped by glass glue. That's why I clicked a promoted tweet. I have regrets. And she says, this 3-in-1 tool helps you work easily and quickly to improve the agglutinating quality of the aesthetic sense of the surface.
Now, see, this spoke to me because As a philosophy major, I would not doubt if I used the term agglutinating quality.
So I have to admit,
I didn't know what it meant.
I don't know what it means.
I'll tell you what it means. It means to firmly stick or be stuck together to form a mass. And an example would be this secretion may form crusts, agglutinating the eyelids.
See, I actually admit I kind of geeked out on this one because I searched agglutinate, and the first thing that came up was in languages, certain languages, they put word parts together to make bigger descriptive words. So it's like, it's hard to describe, but basically Chinese is one of those languages with all the characters having individual meanings.
That's cool.
And so I took the word and put it in a English to Chinese translator. And the two separate word parts mean congeal and set. So basically what I think that the original term or the original sentence was saying that it would make your caulk look good after it was set by smoothing it out.
Yes, but they said that in one word.
Yeah.
You're hired for the translation software, Rob, I tell you. But we should tell folks
that was funny.
This is a caulking tool, and it looks like it's a scraper and like a tooling kind of rig. It's a handheld tool, and I'm going to have to get one of these because God knows my agglutinating is not up to snuff.
Yeah, basically it's like a plastic handle that has all these little triangular attachments that go on the end. Some of them are for cutting out the caulk. I mean, basically this is something you would use in your bathtub to pry out the old caulk and to apply a new bead of caulk where the tub meets the tile wall. And I don't know, it looks pretty useful.
Mm-hmm.
So any listeners who have any insights on agglutinating your tub, please share those with us because I'm sure there's so much we don't know. This is from Kathryn, our other friend. I was listening to episode 311 with great interest when one of your listeners talked about the economics of going all electric. As a proud owner of a newly all electric but really old house, I'm definitely biased, but I'd like to comment. Your listener is entirely correct that going all electric is not economical for 100% of homes right now. However, it is economical for nearly all new homes right now, and this percentage is increasing as heat pumps become more widespread. There are many clever people working on this, but not enough. Here's a great resource for the economics of electrifying buildings all over the country. I'll put this link that Kathryn put in her email on our podcast page. Certainly some places with cheap natural gas and expensive electricity are going to be the last to electrify, but that shouldn't discourage people or cities from checking to see if all electric is right for them. I'm personally much happier that I never have to worry about backdrafting appliances and my indoor air pollution is lower. For those of you that are interested in induction cooking, you can actually borrow induction cooktops in San Diego to give them a try. We love our induction stove and keep showing people how quickly we could boil water, our poor guests. Methane is indeed a terrible greenhouse gas when it leaks, 25 times worse than CO2 over 100 years. But there are a bunch of refrigerants that are much worse. R134A is 1,430 times worse than CO2. While this may seem unimportant, one of the easiest and most impactful aspects to combating climate change is to swap out these refrigerants, which is why we have the Kylie amendment to the Montreal Protocol. See Table 2.14 for the list of global warming potentials. Thanks so much for talking about climate change and for being general building nerds. I love it. Best wishes and Happy New Year. So I emailed Kathryn to ask her some further questions regarding her discussion of going to all electric. And I brought up the point that, it depends where you are. And I asked her about where she lives, and I didn't remember. And I asked her some other things about folks who don't have the money to switch over their houses or pay more for their heating fuel. And she said, I live in Seattle, Washington, so essentially all of our power is zero carbon. Seattle City Light has been offsetting whatever small fraction of power is still fossil based from Bonneville Power Administration. In the winter, power is 9.99 cents a kilowatt hour for the first 880 in a 2-month period. Then it's 13.26 after that. When I had fossil gas, I paid $11.52 a month for the connection fee, then $0.91 a therm. Since we only had the hot water heater and the stove, most of the bill was the connection fee. The house did used to have a furnace, but was so old and the connection to the chimney was so janky that we were worried we'd suffocate in our sleep and drop too many IQ points, so we never turned it on after we bought the house. We guess it was from the 60s. I agree with you that new technologies are often out of reach for lower income people. In the short term, I'm okay with that, and people with a higher risk tolerance can foot the bill to bend the cost curve for poorer folks. I think it's a good long-term solution would be some kind of equivalent to the rural electrification program of old, rather than having the wealthy jump ship and leave the crumbling infrastructure to be paid for by fewer and fewer people. That way leads to more explosions. One other item of note, it beyond saying that it was in one of the 137 podcasts, is that the relatively low cost of natural gas is propped up by the price of oil. In fracking wells, oil pays the bills, but the natural gas is often a byproduct. With the price of oil in the toilet, it would be interesting to see what happens with the supply of natural gas. Happy New Year, Kathryn. Kathryn, she's a smart lady.
Yeah. We actually have a new GBA contributor, John Harrod. He owns Snug Planet, which is a residential energy upgrade small company. And his rallying cry is to electrify all homes. And so I reached out to him and shared Kathryn's email just to get him, her first email, I didn't have the second one, just to get him to weigh in with his thoughts. And he really, he concurred with a lot of what she said, but he made a specific point about the potential global warming of HFC refrigerants. And it just so happened when I reached out to him that he was working on a GBA post about how to mitigate the effects of refrigerant leaks. So keep an eye out for that. I'm looking forward to it. But he just made the short point that, aside from phasing them out for climate friendly alternatives over the long term, that there are things you can do, and this is assuming what he's going to be writing about, to prevent the leaks during installation, service, and decommissioning, to limit their impact. So I just thought that was neat, and I'm happy to have his voice because this is his issue, is how to go about electrifying all homes. And yeah, new homes are a much easier bet. Although, he also made the point that, electric heat pumps are gaining momentum as a way to retrofit older homes. So anyway.
Go ahead, Rob.
Well, the thing is, so the article that that Kathryn cited was from the Rocky Mountain Institute, which has been around since the early '80s, and their whole goal is to improve our energy infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And one thing about like the ease and cost of electrifying homes is it's getting easier and easier every year. Like, for instance, I got the heat pumps and the solar panels on my house 2 consecutive years, a couple of years ago. And, I'd known about that stuff for 10 years working at GBA. But in the early years, all the case studies I would see about solar powered homes were people that either just really cared enough about it that they sacrificed big budgets, or they were wealthy people with big budget projects, and the solar was like a fraction of the cost of the project, and they had the cash to put up front. But the thing is, over the years, the lending options have gotten so much easier. There's a lot more choices. All of the companies that provide these types of equipment and services, if you find the right companies, they will do all the paperwork for you to get the financing. And there's a lot of resources.
Can I interrupt you though, Rob? I think we on the East Coast and Kathryn out on the West Coast live in a different place than the middle of the country, where I can imagine there's not the incentives to electrify your home that we're given.
Cost-wise, you mean?
Cost-wise.
Yeah.
And programs, right?
Yeah. Well, but the thing is, so the North Carolina NC State, for years and years, I've known about this for long before I worked at GBA, has this Desire, DSIRE. It's I don't know what it stands for. It's an acronym for something, but it's the NC Clean Energy Technology Center. And they keep a comprehensive list of state and federal programs around the country that they update, I think, monthly, of all of the. And so I went just for curiosity's sake and looked at, because I would love to get a heat pump water heater. just because that's one of the biggest loads on my solar panels. And that's one of the things that's keeping me from going to zero energy in this house.
And it would help you dehumidify your basement as a very beneficial side effect, right?
Exactly. And so, I went and looked, and sure enough, there's a loan program that is tied to the energy audit program that I got years ago to get those other systems. And it's, I can borrow up to $3,000 for 3 years at zero interest.
Wow.
So that would completely cover the heat pump. And the thing is, I'm pretty sure if I did the math, maybe it wouldn't exactly cover the cost savings, but it would basically be a wash while I was paying it off on my electric bill. And then in 3 years, I'd basically have, a significant decrease in my costs.
How long did you finance the photovoltaic panels on your roof, Rob?
That's a 12-year loan. And I've had them for a year and a half now, I think.
Do you know off the top of your head how much that adds to your electric bill monthly?
So my electric bills right now, based on what my neighbors are seeing, would be well over $300 a month with all the stuff that I've got running right now. And I pay just over $200 a month for the loan on the solar panels. And when I got it, our electric bills were a little bit lower, and I was averaging about $50 less a month in total cost. When you figure that my electric bill is much smaller, and my loan payments kind of offset some of the electric bill.
Jeff, I'm going to put you on the spot. Can you ever imagine switching to your house to all electric? Is that something you think could be viable?
I would think so. Switching out the oil-fired furnace for a heat pump could do it, but we talk about mini splits and things like that. I don't know that much about a larger scale heat pump.
Well, they too are very efficient now. I think
I would think they would be more efficient.
In the 2+ range, and I think SERs in the probably 20, right, Rob?
Yeah, and I think one of the things I was reading some article on GBA, and they're talking about how one of the problems of adoption of this stuff is not necessarily the cost; it's just the knowledge. There's a lot of builders out there who remember the heat pumps from 20, 30 years ago and know that those things could not take care of heat in a northern climate. But now we've got heat pumps that can work in Minnesota and Maine. So
yeah. Well, it is technology that is evolving, and I hope we can make it work. I worry that it's going to be poor folks who are going to be left behind and have to pay, for the aging infrastructure of gas distribution, because they don't have any alternatives to switch. They just don't have the cash, and it's tough to get loans if you're poor. I think you would all agree.
Yeah.
I want to do one more thing, and then we're going to get to some questions. Hi, FHB team. I'm a 29-year-old DIYer, and I'd like to share my air sealing adventure with you. Doesn't this sound great already? I bought my first home at the end of 2018, a vinyl-clad bungalow built in 1990, my childhood home. During the pre-purchase inspection, the inspector let me know all of the energy-related grants the government offered. This led me to the rabbit hole of building science and air sealing. Before I knew it, I was ripping off vinyl siding and sheathing. I served the mice their eviction notice and started work. I replaced the chewed up fiberglass with rock wool, put energy blocks over the electrical boxes, installed BP's R4 insul sheathing with acoustic sealing around every stud, taped the seam, and used Prosoco's joint and seam filler where the sheathing met the foundation. I followed that with 2 1/4 inches of EPS foam, reinstalled all the windows as Audis, replaced the original windows with high-performance ones. The attic was wide open at the time, so I tackled that too. I shuffled around the fiberglass bats, taped all the seams in the vapor barrier, sealed off the ceiling penetrations, and made a new, more airtight attic hatch. I then added another layer of insulation for a total of R68. This year, I changed the footing drains, enlarged and replaced the basement windows, changed the basement door, and began insulating the basement. My pre-work blower door was 3.97 air changes. My post-work blower door was 0.85 air changes. All this work was done by me with some help from my father here and there. The podcast was with me throughout, and I'd like to thank you and all the building science community for helping me get this far. Keep up the great work. Alex from Quebec.
He's got to feel really good about that. That's
impressive.
That's awesome.
That's really impressive.
Yeah.
I think he's at the high end of the spectrum of sort of just how determined and successful, a project like that can be. It's like,
I bet he's one of those guys who's been reading about this stuff for 5 years and, has a really good handle on it before he got going.
Oh yeah. It's a great accomplishment, Alex. I applaud your efforts. If you feel like you want to spend a few weeks helping me air seal my house, I welcome you to come down from Quebec. I'll put you up.
So this goes to a question I think I've asked you guys recently, and it's, every now and then when I get like unsure of my decisions on what I'm doing to this old house, I'll sneak a question into the Q&A forum, and people will call me out as like they realize that I work there and I shouldn't be.
Should you know this, Rob Watson?
I need to come up with an alias. But anyway, it's like, I've been in this house 18 years and I've been doing the same kind of stuff, but it's a lot more difficult in a big balloon framed house from the 1870s with a stone foundation and with all the junk that I've piled up in here over the years. But it's like, it made me think about like, is it, if you're doing all this stuff yourself, because like a lot of people will say that deep energy retrofits, meaning a deep insulation overhaul and air sealing overhaul of an old house, is hard to economically justify from a return of investment. But if you're living there and you're not going anywhere and it's your time and it makes you and you enjoy the process and the results and it makes you more comfortable, I mean, it just seems to make sense to me.
I think there are so many things like that, Rob, at least with a deep energy retrofit, I'm going to guess that more than half of the cost is labor because it is very labor intensive work, right?
Sure.
And you need to protect the client's house and, likely they're living there and that's all complicating. So like you said, if you're doing it yourself, I think it's probably a lot more cost effective. Still doesn't want to make me crawl on my attic for hours on end, I got to say.
Like that one guy who caulked every seam in his board sheathing.
That's so fantastic. I love it. Well, if any of you folks who are listening want to share your air sealing adventures, we always love to hear them. Okay, this comes from Jeff in Tehachapi, California. So you guys were sure I was going to massacre that name, I'm betting, but I found this amazing website that will help you pronounce city names from all over the world. So that's my new favorite thing.
You got to share us the link.
I'll put that on the podcast page too. Tehachapi, California. Good day, FHB podcast team. This comes from Jeff. I was just listening to a Radiolab podcast episode titled Terrible COVID Christmas Special, which discussed pandemic numbers. When I heard something that made me pause, you can imagine my shock when one of the hosts started that most homes have less than one air change per hour. Really? Where did that data come from? Start around 30 minutes of the 30-minute mark of the podcast if you'd like to hear the discussion. There was also a discussion regarding recommended air changes per hour, 3 to 6, and cracking your windows 6 inches to help improve the air changes per hour. I'm pretty sure the hosts are not experts in the field of efficacy or epidemiology, so a liberal amount of mental salt was applied to get through the podcast. Just thought you would find it interesting. Thanks a lot for all you do and keep up the great work. So Jeff, they're talking about natural air changes per hour. And what we talk about in the building science community is at 50 pascals of air pressure, which as I understanding it is like about a 40 mile per hour wind. So it's artificially difficult, so you get leakage, right? So some people convert the air changes at 50 pascals to natural air changes, and it's always a fraction of the higher number. So that's what they were talking about, but I can see where there was some confusion for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy for someone who knows building science to like see a red flag pop up when they hear that number, and you got to remember that, like you said, we're under a blower door test when we were measuring air changes per hour, so we're artificially increasing the pressure in the house. So
I think it's funny that he wrote to us versus writing to them.
That's a good point.
So Patrick, do you happen to know what that calculation might be to go from ACH 50 to natural air changes?
That's a great question.
I don't, Rob, but I have seen, spreadsheets that have that conversion in there. I don't know what the equation is, but
do you think more and more people are using the CMF calculation or unit of measurement now, or
CFM?
CFM, right? Do you think that's becoming? It seems to me I read someplace that was becoming more the standard unit.
Well, I know that the folks in the weatherization industry use those numbers more regularly than folks like us, and in the media and the building science and design communities where ACH 50 is the standard. Mm-hmm. My guess is it's because if you do CFM, you don't have to figure out the volume of the house, which is often very complicated. Right.
Yes.
Well, but I just have to point out that the geek meter is pinned all the way to the right now, so we'll be losing some of our audience.
Oh my God! So we need a geek meter graphic to demonstrate the geekery going on at any one moment.
Yeah. Well, anyway, though, but to his point, one air change natural. I was trying to find what is typical in a house, and at 50 pascals, Martin Holliday mentioned in one article about how is there an average ACH value for older houses. Actually, it was a forum question. 1999 study of 299 Wisconsin homes showed a median air leakage of 6 ACH 50.
I was going to guess 8.
I think that's a very difficult thing to quantify. It depends entirely where you live. I mean, the age of the housing stock, the methods of construction, that's going to be all over the board.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
What's the air change at 50 pascals going to be in the Florida Keys in a beach house that was built in the 30s,
Well, and plus a lot of people make a point that, when you live in a warmer climate, that you may not be quite as a warm, dry climate, especially, you might not be as concerned about air changes per hour, because that's probably not your biggest
energy cost,
concern,
mm-hmm.
or comfort concern.
I was talking with Travis Brunkart, who's a builder in Kansas, and he was saying that people just don't care. They're just used to being uncomfortable. They don't care. They expect their windows to be drafty, so it's really hard to convince them. And he's like, and energy's cheap, so it's really hard to do high performance homes here because there's not the monetary incentive, and and
the housing stock is way less expensive. You can't spend 6 figures on an improvement and expect to ever get a return on your investment. It's just not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
This comes from our other friend, Jonathan from Silver Spring, Maryland. And he writes, hello all, I recently hired a licensed contractor to cut a new window opening in our south-facing dining room wall. This is our first south-facing window. We really appreciate the light and solar gain this time of year. The interior is framed with 2x4s and the exterior is brick. I almost fired the guy halfway through the job because his crew didn't flash the opening. He told me he's done hundreds of new windows and never flashes them. He said caulk is enough on a brick opening. The window is a replacement style picture window placed in a box of 1x8 PVC. Since the installation, I've paid attention to window units installed in brick. Sure enough, they're laid directly into the masonry with some type of caulk. Even in commercial construction, short of ripping the window out, I was advised by the home center to at least apply some flashing cement to the exterior. That's what I plan to do. I have a couple things working in my favor. The roof has a small overhang about 6 feet above the window. It keeps most of the water away. Using a grinder, I beveled the mortar sill so it slopes away from the house to keep the water rolling away from the window. I'd like to know what you recommend. I should have done this myself. Thanks as always, Jonathan, Silver Spring, Maryland. P.S. I discovered my siding rotting away when I was up on the ladder. I repitched the gutter and installed some step flashing and a kick-out diverter as a temporary fix. I would have preferred my roofer didn't rip out the step flashing 3 years ago.
Isn't that common for...
Why do roofers rip out flashing?
Yeah.
You think they would know better, right? This is in the way. Let's just get this out of here.
So am I right to think that his window was put into like a box? Like it wasn't put straight into the masonry, right? It was put into.
So he bought a replacement window, which is ordinarily meant to go in the existing window frame.
Yeah.
And instead of that, they made a 1x frame out of PVC stock and made their own window frame and then put this thing in, I'm assuming, as a unit.
So I feel like it seems like backer rods would have been applicable here. Am I right?
Well, that definitely helps. And in the commercial, building sector, they are really all about good sealant joints, right? And they use backer rod and they use good sealants, and it's applied by people who know what the heck they're doing. And it's just expected to be a normal part of routine maintenance. Every once in a while, you have to go and fix this stuff or replace it, and that's just part of business.
Yeah, and they're probably using polyurethane caulks that are extremely durable and sticky and flexible.
And these people do this every day, so they know what they're doing.
Yeah. So
what I would tell you to do in the residential sector is go to finehomebuilding.com and look up Mike Sloggett's retrofitting a window in a brick opening, and that's going to tell you exactly how to do this. And despite what these guys say, and I have no doubt that this is what they do all the time, and I have no doubt this is what you see most often, but they don't flash them. But the better thing to do is, if you can, is to get some plastic flashing and slip it up behind the WRB. Hopefully there is one. There isn't always, and then you flash the window like you would. And the PVC flashing, which is often used as a substitute for aluminum trim coil for wrapping stock and outdoor applications. The thing about the PVC is it doesn't wrinkle and bend like the aluminum coil, but you can use this stuff to slip behind the WRB, and it's more rigid than trying to put flashing tape or some kind of papery or softer WRB.
Is putting windows into a masonry house is it much more complicated than
Yes.
Seems like it is.
Because the thing is, if you were doing a wood shingle or a clapboard or vinyl sided house, you can easily strip back the siding to the point where you get access to the WRB, and you can flash it in completely, very effectively. And but with brick, you're sort of working inside the opening, and you've got the complication that you've got this cladding that is holding moisture, and if you don't get it right, you're going to be driving moisture into the joints of your framing there. And so I think Mike, in his video series, Mike Sloggett, who Patrick's referring to, he used a combination of some sort of rigid flashing like you're talking about, and I think he used like the 3M flex tape too to sort of tie it to the window, to the jambs. But in this case, at least he's got the PVC jamb, which is at least a bit of a barrier between the reservoir, the brick cladding, and the window. And maybe what I would do is, in this case, since he's not going to do anything from the outside now that the window's in place, is if he wanted to pop off the casings from the inside and see if there's enough gap to at least get some good sealant in as far out towards the end of the window as he can. Are
you thinking that's going to stop water or air or both?
I think possibly both, but I mean, for certainly it would maybe help with like the solar vapor drive, because on a sunny day after a rainy day, a brick cladding could be driving moisture into any openings in the that are protected by a WRB or flashing, right?
Yes. The piece with Mike Sloggett is one of the things I'm most proud of here in my tenure at Fine Homebuilding. It's a magazine piece and a video series on how to do this, and you should look at both, because the process is great in video, but seeing the layered drawings in the magazine piece is also very helpful, right? It shows you the right way to put the things in one very accurate illustration. So I would say, if you're doing this, take a look at those two pieces of content on finehomebuilding.com.
Just out of curiosity, Patrick, because I was looking for something along these lines on GBA and didn't come up with anything. How long ago was that article published? And do you think much has changed that it would warrant somebody else doing it again?
No. 2012 was the date of that article and video series. And the thing is, there's a lot of details like that maybe our material options have gotten better over the years, but the techniques are pretty much the same.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
It's one of the harder things that remodelers are charged to do correctly, right? It's not an easy thing to get right, and it's Mike's the guy to teach us all how to do it.
Before we go away from this question, I also want to point out, so the photo of the kick out and step flashing on that window, that roof. Basically, he was talking about he had a roof.
Do you need to get that?
No, sorry. I thought
he had a roof up against a wall, and that's obviously where your step flashing goes. And then the roof didn't quite get to the end of the wall, and so the siding was damaged by water around where the roof terminated at the gutter. But I noticed that his siding was down almost tight to the roof. And I was looking at some of our flashing articles, and I pulled up one by Mike Gerton, and in it he points out that pretty much all siding should be kept 2 inches up. A lot of people don't like to see the flashing, but if you want your siding to last, you need to keep it a couple of inches up from the roof where the step flashing is. And he says he uses coil stock with 6-inch legs on each end of his step flashing so that he has the room to get it up there. Because if you buy those little pieces of pre-cut step flashing,
they're ridiculous.
They're really tiny, and they're not really going to do much. I mean, unless you do a good job of taping them where they hide underneath the siding, but why rely on that?
They're just not tall enough to do a good job.
Yeah.
Maybe in Arizona they're fine, but this comes from Jeff in Campton, New Hampshire. Hi, FHB podcast crew. My wife and I debate how clean a job site should be. On one end of the spectrum is to clean as you go and fully clean up every day. This is safer and also saves time looking for tools and materials that are jumbled up. I'm on the other end of the spectrum, leaving all the cleanup until the very end in order to maximize the time I have to work, normally 1 to 2 hours in the afternoon before picking up my son from daycare, and not spending 15 minutes. I also think it's the most time efficient to deal with the mess and do periodic big cleans. What do you guys think?
I think he keyed in on something right there, safety issues. If somebody else is working around him and it's a messy job site, that's a recipe for some kind of accident. I'm a big clean as you go. I think there are 2 types of people in the world, those who make their bed and those who don't. And the ones who make their beds are going to clean as they go. And the ones who don't are going to make a big fat mess and clean it up later. And
Jeff, what's your assessment? What do you do? What do you think's the best use of your time?
I tend to make a mess and not clean it up as I go, but I try and do it the other way, but it's not my nature.
Yeah, it's your nature. Or it's
How about you, Rob? What's your preferred cleanup tactic?
I can answer this for him.
It kind of depends on where I'm working, and that means whether or not it's a friend or a client's job or my job, for certainly, because I would never leave a client's job messy. And it also depends on how much space I have and how quickly I want to get something done. Like when I did that siding job, I took some very nicely cropped photos of the siding itself. And what you didn't see were the huge piles of debris in every direction outside of the frame of the shot. That being said, if you plan your workspace if you spend a little extra thought planning your workspace, placing your tools, getting some bins or racks or whatever, or tarps, whatever it takes. If you have an organized job site from the start, it makes it a lot easier to not make as big a mess and to not be tripping over things and to have everything where you need it when you want it.
Arguably, that's a time saver too.
Yes.
You're not scrambling around looking for stuff, right? You know, right where it is.
Yeah, but I've been at both. I've been at all ends of the spectrum and everywhere in between, depending on the job. So.
Yeah.
You guys are going to have trouble believing this, and folks who listen to the show for any length of time are going to have trouble believing this, but I hate messes, and I cannot work around messes. I hate it.
No, you're a neat guy.
Tripping over stuff, I don't even like tracking sawdust around. I clean that up periodically. I can't stand it, and I get it from my mom and dad who are the same way. I remember helping my dad on projects when I was a kid, and it used to baffle me why he'd be like having the shop vac out cleaning up in the middle of a job, and I'm the same way now.
I wish my dad was like that. I certainly learned a lot from him about how to improvise with what I had lying around. We had an old barn full of so much junk, and I would just pick through piles of stuff to make all kinds of creative projects when I was a kid. I mean, it was like a cave, like my basement. It was dark, no windows, just bins everywhere. And every spring we would take my dad's van and completely fill it and take it to the dump with stuff that he had collected over the past year. That was in the way. And so you can kind of see where I get my work style.
You and Matt were teasing me about my recent kitchen remodeling where I had like all my tools like piled in little piles and the floor was all swept up. And admittedly, that's a exception because you need your kitchen if you have only one. So, and you need to make food, especially now. So
I think if your mess is affecting other people, you should factor that in.
For sure.
And as Rob suggested, it's an entirely different equation when you're working for somebody. They don't like messes, and you need to be very cognizant of that.
And it just makes you look more professional too. Totally. I mean, if anybody walks onto a job site and sees piles, oh my God, I see this all the time on like YouTube videos of builders, and it's like you can't even see the ground around the foundation of the house. It's just covered with scraps of plywood, and it's just like it just looks unprofessional and it's dangerous.
Yeah.
You know, a few times in recent memory, I've stopped by job sites, unannounced, just because. Sometimes you get content that way. Hey, what are you doing? That's very interesting. And I can tell within 30 seconds if it's going to be the right person for Fine Homebuilding based on how organized their job site is and how they've set up their work, as Rob suggests. If everything is happening everywhere, I know they're not the person for us.
Not focused, yeah. Agreed. That makes sense.
Jeff had another question. I think people get sucked into trends without even realizing it. Trends come and go, like subway tile, which is on the out along with white cabinetry. The excuse is that it is timeless. What about open concept, plank tile floors, white walls, accent wallpaper? Will the trends return to smaller rooms, wall-to-wall carpet, and bold wall colors? I hope not.
I know. What comes around goes around. However, I will say this open concept thing, the idea of smaller rooms, I don't know. It gets an awful knock. I think we've talked about this before. I just don't think open concept is the right way to go in every situation, but it sure seems like that's the first thing people do when they're remodeling their house, opening it up. Open it up, right? Create an open concept floor plan.
It really depends on the family and how you use your house, I would imagine. I mean, because like when we have people over to our house, the kitchen is like closed off from the rest of the house, and everybody wants to be in the kitchen, and it's tiny, and it's like we've got a living room and dining room, and it's like if we had a big open, I think open concepts work for the space that you have people over in. Like I don't think a whole house has to be open concept, but I think having like your dining room and kitchen connected.
Well,
but then again,
that's really what that means, right? Kitchen, living room, and dining room are all related to one another. It's not like the bedrooms and all other rooms are related. That's really what that means, right? Yeah. And it's always the same story. We really like to cook and entertain, so we want all of those rooms to connect. So there's room for everybody. But there are a lot of downsides to open concept that I don't think people think about or talk about much.
Like,
so anyway, it's hard to arrange furniture. Right? You've got this huge, massive space. You want to delineate the spaces and make their functions clear, but it's difficult to do that and make it look good.
And you have less walls for furniture.
Walls. Exactly right. Yeah. And there's no privacy. And I think it's less interesting. Like, Rob, I love walking through your house. It's such a, it's like a den of what are rabbit?
A warren.
Well, so it's kind of like one of my favorite gardens I've ever been in. You know, people think of a yard as like this big lawn with a perimeter of plantings, right? That's what most people think of as a yard. These guys I knew in Oakland, California had this tiny, like 1/4-acre garden, and you could spend hours in their garden and not see every corner, every part of it. And it was because it was basically a cluster of outdoor rooms. And so, yeah, if you're going to have a less open concept house, at least make sure that the rooms match the size and use that you want them to. So like, I would be fine if my kitchen was like another 50, 100 square feet, because then there would be room for people to congregate in there, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I hope to God that wall-to-wall carpet does not come back, because that is like just gross.
Not even the shag carpet, that nice fuzzy like 3-inch pile, orange and blue. And
so, Rob, you and I are nearly the same age. Kylie too, I believe. I remember that being all the rage as a kid, and I remember like seeing people raking their freaking carpet. Makes no sense.
Imagine everything that's in the bottom of a 3-inch pile shag carpet.
Oh, yuck.
Jeff, did you ever live with shag carpeting?
Not real shag carpeting, but our next door neighbors had it, and after a couple of years, it was all matted and disgusting. And
to this guy's point, though, Jeff's point, I do think there are some trends that circle back, like bold color walls. You can see that coming again, you know?
Well, I think everything comes around, you know?
Yeah, not everything, but I think things that have worth and are, I hate the word timeless, but some trends come and go and stay gone, and others, I think, return.
I think it's going to be hard to ever, like, for white tile to go out of fashion. I mean, like, that was started in the Victorian period, right? And it's like, that's just what the color of tile, and it's...
But yeah, but in kitchens for the past 10 years, it's been gradually becoming this standard thing because it's easy and it's clean, and it's easy to design around it. And cheap. But the thing is, I think it's just people are getting bored, It's like my daughter is like the biggest architect critic. She's 14 years old, and she's the one who's like pointing out that, like, because we love modern houses, but there's so many that are just there's so many details that are overdone, and it's like, I think there are some things that can be timeless. I mean, I lived in a town for years where there was just a lot of old properties with sort of like old details, and I don't know what differentiates them from the stuff that comes in and out of style. But I do believe there are certain things that can be timeless. I just don't know how you define what they are.
If they stick around. I
don't know how you figure out what. Well, I guess observation is really what it comes down to.
I want to do one more question, and we're going to run over time. Hopefully, Jeff doesn't have anywhere to be, but we're just gonna do it because this comes from Jim in Heartland, Wisconsin. I think it's just a really good question. FHB podcast team, I'm doing a gut reno on our 2-story 1970s built home with 2x4 wall construction here in Wisconsin, Zone 6. I'm going for much improved air sealing, so my updated wall system will be taped zip sheathing on the outside, mineral wool insulation on the wall cavity, and Intello Plus on the inside. I'm contracting the outside work and doing the majority of the inside work myself. Originally, I planned to do 2 inches of rigid insulation on the exterior with rain screen, but despite our cold climate, not an abundance of contractors with any experience are interested in doing this work. We've heard this over and over again, right? People just don't want the hassle of putting foam on the exterior of houses. Roofers don't want to put it on roofs, I'm not great at heights, nor do I have any equipment to work at heights other than an extension ladder, so this would be a challenge for me to do an entire 2,600 square foot house myself. Since the Intello installation instructions recommend furring out the walls after the Intello is installed, had me thinking I could just do a Bonfig wall assembly and install some additional insulation between the furring strips to get my R value up. My question to the team is this: if I wanted to use Zip R-sheathing ripped down into furring strips, would having only 7/16 inch thick OSB to attach drywall, trim, etc. be problematic in lieu of 1x woodstock? This method was suggested by Mike Maines in a Fine Homebuilding /GBA post, but I couldn't find anything posted where someone actually used this method. Other than Steve Bonfig himself, the only person I'm aware of that ever did a Bonfig wall was Rob Yagid, but I'm not sure how he executed it. One of the Zip R choices would be 7/16 inch OSB with 1 1/2 inches polyiso foam board, which would effectively give me the final 2x6 dimensioned wall. My motivation for this choice is to facilitate standard door and window sizes used for 2x6 wall assemblies. Thanks for your help and the informative, entertained podcast you produce. So, is ripped Zip R-sheathing good for a Bonfiglioli wall? Let's go around the room here. Okay, Jeff, you go first.
I don't see why not.
Is it thick enough?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kylie. What do you think?
It just seems. It seems to me like his question is it thick enough to?
Is it strong enough? Is it going to
hold screws and nails and?
Yeah.
I don't know. I like plywood or solid stock better than OSB for this application. I don't think you save a lot with the foam already attached to the sheathing. I mean, that's really what you're talking about. Is that enough to make this worth experimenting with, right? Instead of the Bonfig wall, which uses strips of EPS and 1x3 furring strips, strapping as we call it in New England. So I would think the strapping would be better for holding screws, especially with trim. I don't think drywall cares because the screws only go in about 3/4 of an inch anyway. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, you're not going to be hanging anything weight-wise from it. I mean, you're basically, if you're talking about just walls and not a cathedral ceiling or something like that, I wouldn't be worried about it at all. I mean, and he says he doesn't know anybody who did anything like that. My attic, I actually did strips of 1/2-inch plywood over XPS to do basically the same thing, and it worked.
You know,
fine.
in this kind of situation, I don't think it's worth experimenting. Why not do something that we know works, right? Like what happens when you start getting screw pops, you know, a year or two from now? It's going to be a hard fix, right? So, I would just say work with the tested assembly.
I think plywood is actually, in my opinion, the best material because unless you do wide strips of furring strips are usually made out of the crappiest wood.
Right.
And if you're driving screws through hundreds of screws through a furring strip or dozens of screws through a furring strip, the chances of it splitting are pretty good. But a piece of decent, sheathing plywood,
even CDX, right?
Yeah,
Rob?
yeah. The cheapest, plywood you can buy, I think, is probably better. And take your circular saw or your table saw, whatever, and rip it into a bunch of strips and put it on there. Personally, I would feel comfortable with the
Zip R?
Mike Main's suggestion of Zip R, but I don't know. I mean, you could probably buy the cheap plywood and the EPS for less than you could buy the Zip R.
I wonder if it's a work. I mean, it seems like one is more labor intensive, right?
It's less steps.
Right.
And if you want to do EPS, the fluffy white insulation instead of XPS, which is really easy to cut with a knife or with a saw, it's crumbly. And so I think we even talked about this in the podcast. It's like, you can get hot wire cutters for EPS foam, which makes a really nice.
Jeff has done this.
Yeah.
I could get into.
Or if you have just a really sharp, thin blade, I think you can do a good job. I mean, you could make a jig for cutting it, certainly with plywood to put pressure on it to keep it from crumbling.
Justin reviewed a circular saw blade, and I believe the manufacturer was Spider with a Y, and it doesn't have any teeth on it, but it is specifically made for cutting foam and making less of a mess while cutting foam. So I'll put a link to that. I haven't used it, so I don't know what it's like, but as I recall, he liked it.
I've heard of people actually using tile or metal or masonry, like diamond blades for that too. It's same idea, where you're using a disc that's basically doesn't have any teeth that are going to grab the foam and chop it up.
Yeah. Waste material doing that too, right? If you don't get a clean cut.
Yeah.
Oh, and it makes a huge mess.
Yeah, I bet.
Jim, I hope you'll keep us posted on your project. It sounds like a great way to improve the energy efficiency of your home. I'll be curious to hear what you decided to do based, if you take our feedback into account or not. I would love to hear what you do. It's a cool project. I wish you great success. Rob, we should remind folks we're going to have some special editions of the podcast for the Builder Show. Is that right?
Yes, we've got a bunch of stuff going on for the Builder Show, but you're more involved in those podcasts. So who do we have for the guests on those things?
So Brian Euler of Pioneer Builders is going to be on the show daily to talk about the stuff he's found at the show. I'm hoping Mike Gerton will also do that same thing. I emailed him over the New Year's holiday, and uncharacteristically, I have not heard from him. So I hope he'll do that. Mike, if you're listening, you haven't responded to my email. It's getting kind of worrisome.
Yeah, shame Mike on the air. That's great. And then, we also have Fernando Padre Ruiz. He's going to be blogging from the show too. It's going to be an interesting experience to see how this whole thing pans out, because it's like I've never seen a virtual event of this scale done before.
Especially when products.
I think it's all very curious. Like, what is virtual trade show? That's a very odd concept to me.
Yeah.
What are the dates? Did you give those?
Let's see.
Oh, you remembered, Kylie. This is the time of the show where we ask Rob things he doesn't know.
Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah. Thank you very much.
For anyone listening.
I suppose I could have looked that up too.
February 9th. No, let's see.
While Rob researches the Builder Show.
The February 9th to the 12th is the virtual show. And you know what? I will make sure that I do my homework and figure out what's going on that show. I've kind of been, out of it for the past vacation weeks.
I want to read. So for the past few weeks, we've been asking listeners to please send us an email describing who you'd like to interview on the podcast. This is going to be something we do for the 40th anniversary of the brand, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We've gotten emails from several folks, but I was going to read one this morning because this is the second person who's requested this individual, so I'm going to just launch into this. Just finished watching your latest podcast on YouTube. As always, it was great entertainment and highly educational. I'd like to put my name in the hat for interviewing an FHB contributor editor. I've been a huge fan of John Carroll's books. I think he is hands down the best educator on print when it comes to the art of home building. He's not a building scientist, but he explains construction skills and techniques in a way that's incredibly clear, concise, and thorough, all at the same time. Having a chance to both thank him and ask him a few questions would be an honor. So those folks who listen to the show who are not familiar with John Carroll's work, you should totally check it out. John is one of the most versatile of our contributors. He is a skilled mason and builder, which usually don't go together, but he's done lots of content over several decades for the magazine, and his book on working alone is a Taunton standard and always in our best-selling list. So it is a very good book and worth checking out if you've not seen it.
I feel like there's another book that Justin used to refer to all the time. I don't think it was that one that you just mentioned. What's his other big book? Do you guys know the title of it?
Yeah.
It's like the Bible.
Oh, are you talking about Renovation? That's Mike Litchfield, perhaps? No?
I'll have to look it up before we...
Okay, I'm looking it up his author page here. He did Working Alone, Complete Visual Guide to Building a House.
That's the one. Complete Visual Guide to Building a House.
Yeah, in fact, we incorporated a whole bunch of his excerpts from his framing book in our recent framing guide. So you can find some good articles by him that are pretty recent on the site.
Well, part of my intent in reading this email is that hopefully John Carroll listens to this show. I don't have any expectation that he does, but John, we want you on the podcast. We'd love to talk to you about your contributions to the Fine Home Building brand over the years and your experience. And I think that, I forget who sent this email, I apologize, but, John. John interviewing John Carroll would be awesome.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
You guys have anything to add? Anything you want to ask or tell our listeners before we go?
I know it's probably not out by the time this thing airs yet, but pretty soon we're going to have the wiring project guide done. So
what's that about, Rob?
Wiring. No, it's every single article and video we've ever done, plus a bunch of book excerpts. Actually, dozens and dozens of books excerpts about how to safely do any kind of wiring project in and around your house.
I would think that would be the most nerve-wracking of sub-trades that...
Oh, it's fantastic, Kylie. You don't even know. Oh, it's awesome.
Take on themselves, but still.
It's, it certainly is intimidating to a lot of people, and you have to, it's one of the, everything you do in home building, you have to be super careful because there's always an opportunity to injure or burn your house down or whatever. But yeah, so we actually have to be super careful in this guide to clearly state all of the safety concerns throughout the guide, because you have to be very careful, especially when you're working in the panel, but really when you're working on any high voltage wiring. But we've had some pretty awesome electricians contribute over the years, and so it'll be great to see all of their work in one place.
I'm not going to belabor this subject, but you know why I love wiring, Kylie?
Tell me, Patrick.
Wires go virtually anywhere. Compared to pipes and ducts, you're talking about something that's 5/8 of an inch. And you need to do most electrical wiring in a residential setting, you need like 5 tools, and they all fit in a pouch, and it's so beautiful.
And work, right?
It's very satisfying and clean work. I mean, it's like it's like the same reason why people like math and science, because it's like there's a very specific way to get the job done, and when you're done, it's like something really impressive is going on. Like now you have light and you can see.
And unlike plumbing, electrons don't care about gravity; they go everywhere, right? Their pressure is created at the power plant, and they'll go all over your house, up and down. They don't care. There's no running out of room for slope, and it's fantastic. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Kylie, Rob, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your questions, comments, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com, and please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Folks, I've been paying attention to the iPodcasts, the Apple Podcasts platform, looking for reviews, and we haven't gotten any in a while. Please do that. Thanks. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive, and happy building.